Welcome to the collection of the wildest and craziest AITA Reddit stories of all time. From wild betrayals to shocking twists, these tales will leave you questioning who is really in the wrong. Let's dive in together. The first story for this collection is from Chocolate OVR. AITA for thinking of breaking up with my GF. I, 21M, and my GF, 21F, have been dating for 2+ years. However, I'm debating on breaking up with her. Sorry, this is long. We're both in the end stages of undergrad. I'm in the co-op program. I work full-time every other semester. I could work anywhere in the country. Because of this, we argue a lot about my placements. She's forced me to only apply to jobs close by, thus limiting my scope. I applied to every job I wanted to, regardless of distance, but kept that within 2.5 hours. Since we started dating, and aside from one co-op placement and vacations and things, we've been together almost every day. My GF works a lot, but spends nearly all her money, and she has no savings. She's been pretty much breaking for the last 1.5 years, but spends all her money on food and toys for her 2 cats and maxes out her credit card every month. She pays it off, which is good. I don't work as much as she does, partially because I don't want to, scold me all you want, and I prioritize my classes. I don't like spending money on things, as I'm actively saving for a car or house, haven't decided yet. Our families pay for our education, which I'm incredibly grateful for. Where it differs is my girlfriend pays her rent for her place, and my parents pay for mine. My GF lives full-time in the city we go to for school. I don't because I move around every other semester. Since January, my GF has been shorter with me, demanding, and a little distanced from me. In the summer, I went home, 45 minutes away, because my lease ended and my classes were remote. Here's examples of what we went through. GF wanted to buy cat food. About 100 cans plus lots of raw food sit untouched in her closet. I asked her why, and she responded with, "Don't question me." In an angry tone, got upset every time I asked her when she'd be able to pay me back for even a portion of the $1.2 thousand I lent her for emergency surgery for one of the cats too. Brought a dog. She walks back to the house for a bath without letting me know. Texted her roommate about it but not me, and demanded that I clean the bathroom up. Shower curtain fell, and flower pots broke on the floor. I planned on cleaning it up, but I wasn't aware they were coming. Proceeded to scold me, and told me to hurry up in the bathroom. 2 of her friends and roommate witnessed this. I was told this after by the roommate that my GF's friends felt bad for me in that situation, and it was unfair of her 3. Got mad at me for telling her the shower curtain fell and immediately blamed me 4. Told me when I applied to my most recent co-op placement, which I'm currently on, that she could break up with me if I get a job that's not in the city we go to school in or the neighboring city. Last week we were out driving, and she was, may not be the right word, micromanaging my driving, telling me to turn this or that way, to slow down or speed up, or where to park. I told her she doesn't need to micromanage. She replied, "I'm not micromanaging. You don't need to get so butthurt about everything." She doesn't seem to care about my hobbies and interests at all. Never encourages me or supports me. I've put music things on a list of Christmas gift ideas, and she straight up said, "You know." Doesn't seem to support my accomplishments except every now and then. If I'm telling her something, same with her roommate, and she isn't interested, she'll say, "Yeah, I don't care about it anymore," while you're mid-sentence. She puts down my program saying, being in an BA honors program isn't as good as a B.SC, which is her program, and that even though my grades are higher, it's only because they're art, humanities classes. She also doesn't care to understand what my co-op jobs are about, which doesn't make me feel good. This has been emotionally exhausting at times and making me feel conflicted if breaking up with her would be the best decision. We did break up for a short time in the summer too, and it was a mess. I love her dearly, and I enjoy being with her in the good times. I've spent nights crying over this. Sometimes I feel guilty for feeling this way and dealing with it internally. Sometimes I think I'm wrong because of how happy she is and what we've had together. AITA for thinking this way? OP is not an AH for setting financial boundaries with his girlfriend. OP's decision to end his relationship is completely justified. OP's girlfriend is an AH for not being supportive and concerned. OP did nothing wrong by prioritizing his well-being. So I would rate OP 0 and OP's girlfriend 3.5 out of 5 on the AH scale. Let's now move on to the next story from basic_dumpling. AITA for wanting to reach out to my ex's PO after he won't stop harassing me and defaming me on his FB. I, 25F, and my ex, 35M, broke up 4 months ago due to domestic violence, mental and physical abuse, manipulation, disrespect, narcissistic and controlling behaviors. We met at work over a year ago and started dating a month later when we connected so well and trauma bonded. He was staying with a friend in his basement and was on probation for a previous domestic violence charge against his ex. He claimed that he had no choice but to choke her out after she had a schizophrenic episode and beat him within an inch of death, and she pressed charges against him, and he's on probation for the next 3 years. At the time, I didn't question anything and felt so terrible and empathetic toward him and didn't push for more answers, though he claimed to have pictures of his broken ribs yet never showed me. He pretty much moved in with me within weeks of dating and just never left my apartment. I was struggling financially at the time, living in a less than 500 square feet 1-bedroom apartment with my dog and him. It was rough. I was not comfortable with him staying over pretty much every night, but I didn't want to say anything because of my people-pleasing tendencies. At first, everything was amazing. He cooked for me, took me on dates, was very affectionate and lovey-dovey. But over time, he became critical and controlling over me. He would berate me whenever I did something wrong and made me feel small, bragging about how he's had 10 years on me and was much smarter and knowledgeable in general. This made me feel about myself because my abusive dad had done the same thing to me for decades. We started having fights regularly. Wherever we fought or argued, I would immediately shut down and start crying and not talk for hours at a time. Later found out this is a trauma response due to abuse, and he would continue lashing out at me for hours on end, screaming at me, calling me names, and would go as far as blocking the exit while filming me, taking my phone so I couldn't talk to anyone, and physically restrict me from leaving my apartment. This really triggered me due to my past and the sexual assault experiences, and he was aware of this, but used them against me. I tolerated this for months, had him convince me that it was my fault for not knowing how to handle my emotions, and would just shut down, and even diagnosed me with autism, BPD, and bipolar. I really believed him since I did research on my own, and matched pretty much all the criteria, and was letting him make me think that I was more mentally unstable than I already was. Fast forward, I broke my lease at my last place due to unlivable situations, horrible neighbor, unsafe surroundings, etc., and moved into my current place in May, which is much nicer and bigger. He moved into with me without asking, which I was hesitant because I am very independent and introverted and needed my personal space, but again, didn't say anything. Fast forward, the fights continued and had gotten worse. We would scream and yell at each other for hours on a weekly basis, which ended with me leaving my apartment for a drive to calm my head. I started self-harming again and even attempted to take my life twice because of the unbearable pain I felt when I was with him. I freaked out at every notification on my phone, anxious every time he spoke to me, was constantly on edge and scared. The final straw came mid-July, when he had hit me when we got into a fight. I immediately started bawling and went to sit in a corner freaking out and having a meltdown. He lashed out at me for hours after, and we argued until 2 a.m, where I called his roommate to pick him up because I couldn't have him in my apartment anymore since I felt unsafe. He said I had finalized our breakup and it was all my fault, and that he doesn't hate anyone but hates me and wishes that I would burn in hell. He got his stuff a couple days later while bombarding me with messages and voicemails, going between apologizing to blaming me for everything. I went back and forth between blocking and unblocking him, not knowing what to do. But did block him at last few days after the breakup and started working on healing. However, that was not the end. I got a message request on FB from someone I didn't know. I opened it, and my heart instantly sank when I saw the mention of his name. It was his new friend who reached out to me for advice and help, as she's been seeing him for a couple months, and that he had been lashing out at her, making her feel suicidal, and started taking medication and seeking professional help. I told her to get away as soon as she can as he is bad news, and we confided in each other for a few days. She broke things off with him a week later, which made him lash out again on her, and made another email to harass me once again. He told me that he has not moved on for the whole 4 months, still loves me, wants me to be his wife and mother of his kids, and wants another chance, and haven't been able to sleep because I'm not there. When I hit him with something along the lines of, I know he proposed to another woman, and they had been intimate, he flipped the switch again. He called me controlling, delusional, toxic, abusive, and that none of that had ever happened, and if I'd just talked to him instead of everyone else, we'd still be together. I gave him a final warning to leave me alone and that I was happier without him. Last Saturday, I finally gathered the courage to go through my apartment and packed all his belongings left into huge trash bags and had a friend of mine to drop them off. His roommate told him that my friend, male, dropped off his stuff, which led to him creating another email, harassed me even more, asking for another chance, asked if he's my new boyfriend, begged me to talk to him for the last time. I was the worst person he's ever met. I was toxic and an etc. I blocked him after receiving 120 plus emails within 12 hours and ended up with receiving flowers that he had delivered to my apartment. I did not respond to any of this and was committed to cutting off all communications once again. Came to work today and was informed by a coworker of mine who's friends with him on Facebook and saw that he had made 30 plus posts talking about me and my friends. I recorded the posts, 3+ minute long clip, and saved it as evidence. The posts twisted the stories completely, giving out details and information that I had shared with him that were personal and very sensitive. I don't know what to do at this point. I really don't want to file for a restraining order as he's already in trouble with the law, but I want this behavior to stop once and for all. This has and still is taking a huge toll on my mental and even physical health. I want to go to his probation officer and inform her of what's been going on, but I have no way of contacting her or even know who she is. Please be kind. I'm not sure what to do. Thanks for reading. Edit. We were engaged at 4 months. I felt pressured into saying yes, though my mom and friends were against it. We only dated for 10 months, and he had not met most of my friends since I was pretty much isolated during the relationship. He later said that I forced him into proposing to me, and that I was abusive towards him where he couldn't say no. I only hung out with my friends twice in 10 months, because he would get upset when I even made plans or talked to my friends without informing him. OP is not an AH for protecting her well-being from her toxic and abusive ex. OP's decision to block and go no contact with him is 100% justified. OP's ex is an AH for continuously harassing and defaming her. So, I would rate OP's ex 4 out of 5, and OP gets 0 on the AH scale. Let's now jump on to the next story from No-Independent, 2062. AITA after my mother kicked me out and is now asking me to pay her bills? I am a 24F who just moved out and started living on my own with my 26M fiancé, who I have been with for nearly 3 years at this point. The main reason we moved out was because my mother essentially kicked me out of her house after I stood up to her for having enough of her BS. My mother has always been a very emotionally unstable person, and from the moment I began being able to think for myself, we have gotten into a lot of arguments. Even before I was with my fiancé, if I had a close friend and spent a lot of time with them at their house, my mother would have a meltdown saying I loved the friend and their parents more than her. It was always difficult to navigate around her, and I began realizing I had severe people-pleasing tendencies from my childhood, because essentially if I said no, she would fly into a rage. Not only that, but I was stayed by my stepfather when I was about 12 years old, and my mother stayed with him until I was 24. They recently split up for reasons not pertaining to me. My mother gaslit me for years, not believing me and always bringing it up at random times. That sent me into a complete mental breakdown, but she never really cared because to her, she was hurting more, and I was. In her words, it hurt more to stay with him than it was for me to have to live with my abuser for nearly half of my life. There was even a time my mother straight up punched me in my face after discovering I had self-harm scars and tried dragging me to church because I must have a demon in me and be possessed. These are just a few instances of her behavior towards me. But everything got worse once I entered my relationship with my now partner. My fiancé and I are both pagans and don't conform to traditional Christianity, which my mother hates. She believes that my boyfriend is the main reason for this and that he has turned me against God, but I have been non-religious for years. They have gotten into one-sided screaming arguments where my mother would yell at him about being disrespectful and stealing her daughter, where my boyfriend on most ends would try to calmly explain situations until he spoke up for himself, which often got him kicked out of my house, or my mother would end up leaving, saying she never wanted to see him again. There have been many instances of my mother saying, I loved my boyfriend more than her. Even though I explained to her multiple times, it's a different kind of love and they cannot be compared. Even when my family was going through a rough time financially and we had no groceries at the house, my fiancé bought me a food stash to keep in my room for emergencies. One weekend when I wasn't home, my mother went through my room, found my food stash, and proceeded to get angry that I was being taken care of essentially, calling me and yelling at me, my boyfriend and his parents, for ensuring I was being fed. I never realized it until I got with my fiancé, but I had a severe eating disorder due to my mother. I thought eating once a day was normal and weighed about 80 pounds. I never got hungry, never had an appetite, and that was due to my body suppressing my hunger growing up. My mother has even tried to turn my family against my boyfriend, and I stating that he is extremely controlling and dominating towards me, stating things like my cousins who I grew up with from babies disliked my new personality, and my fiancé, also stating my aunts thought I was also disrespectful. But when I asked them about this myself, they said they've never said those things. Basically, I have been put in a spot where I feel very estranged from all my family because of my mother spreading most times lies about me and my fiancé. I have tried to explain this to her, and she went and told my aunts and family that I wanted nothing to do with them, which was so far from the truth, because I love my family very much, but I'm not willing to put my mental health in jeopardy again. So now to the story. My mother, after leaving my stepfather, was unable to find any work in our country due to its economy. I was also unemployed at the time, as I was a recent graduate with no experience, and no one wanted to hire me due to that. My mother got a job as a babysitter abroad, and decided to take it. A week before she was going to leave for her job, I was able to secure a well-paying position at a company. However, when I told my mother the salary, she was first pleased and expected me to pick up a few bills, and I agreed, as at the time I thought it would only be 1 or 2 while also taking care of the house while she was gone for nearly 8 months. Only to soon realize as she left, she placed all the bills into my hands, always complaining she had no money, which was a lie, as I knew she was making much more than I was due to it being a foreign currency, and her telling me the exact amount before she left. As soon as she would leave, a nightmare would ensue. I had asked my fiancé to move in with me into my mother's house for protection and safety. My mother was fully aware of this and on board with it. However, my fiancé would go home on weekends, and then I would invite one of my friends to stay over, once again for safety. The country I live in isn't very safe, and I have already been held at gunpoint and robbed, so I have a lot of anxiety over those things. My house has a security system with cameras that my mother had synced to her cell phone. Even though I would tell her, and she knew who my friend was, who was staying with me, I would get a phone call every night asking questions like, "Who is that on the camera? Whose car is that? Why is there a mat in the porch that has been misplaced?" etc. It became very exhausting constantly getting phone calls, including when I'm working to answer questions that don't need explaining. I had a small get-together on my birthday at the house, and the entire night I was bombarded with calls, even though she knew about this get-together before it happened. In my country, it's currently rainy season, and it storms and rains nearly every other day. The house's roof began to leak, and my fiancé and I decided to move things around, as the leak was occurring by our freezer in the house and causing the plug to get wet and spark the wires in the house. I first consulted with my mother that we were moving things due to the leak, and she even agreed it would be best. However, once things were moved about, she began to argue on why certain things were the way it was, and demanded that we put the house exactly how she wants it done. I told her that my fiancé had gone home for the weekend, and we wouldn't be able to move it until he comes back. She didn't like that response and immediately decided to call my aunts, who randomly showed up in front of the house, banging on the door, insisting to be let in, saying things like, "My mother is crying," and such things as how I had left her house in a mess. This honestly left me in shock, and when my aunts inspected the house, they were genuinely confused on my mother's reaction. But they told me to endure, as this was just how my mother was, and I had to put up with her because she is my mother. From that instance, I had constant anxiety, whether it be through the cameras of my mother, watching my every motion. She even called me on a public holiday to ask why I wasn't working and I was at home, or her just straight up sending people to the house without warning. It was nearly unbearable, and my fiancé even saw the physical toll it began taking on me, where I would be constantly stressed about one thing being out of place, in case my mother would send my siblings or family to the house, where she would then ask them to video call and go inspecting each room for quality assurance. The night I had enough was when my mother called me in a group call with my mother-in-law, where she then began berating me, telling me that I didn't know how things work, and even at one point called my fiancé's mother illiterate. Hearing this, my fiancé got visibly upset and told my mother, "Don't call my mother illiterate." When my mother heard my fiancé's voice on the line, she began yelling at him, saying it was a private conversation and he is so disrespectful for chiming in. But I told my mother that my fiancé is a part of my life and his mother is also a part of this conversation, and he does have a right to listen. The argument got to the point where I told my mother I had received my first paycheck, and I didn't inform her because I knew from the moment I told her I received money she would ask for it. And I was correct in my assumption, as only a few weeks prior, she told me how I was going to spend my first paycheck on her house that wasn't even mine, as she doesn't have any money. I then told her, "I am paying the bills out of a courtesy for you because you're my mother and I love you. But this isn't my responsibility. I could easily have gone and rented instead of doing this. But I care for you, so I'm here, paying the bills, taking care of the upkeep of a house." After hearing this, she took it as a personal insult and proceeded to tell me that she doesn't want me doing her any favors and that I can get out of her house and she will get someone else to take care of it. Even furthermore, a few weeks after that argument while I wasn't home, she sent my aunts to the house without my knowing to inspect and clean it. The only way I knew was by the alarm system at the house going off. After that incident, I knew I wanted no more. No more anxiety, no more manipulation, and no more damage to my mental health. After that, my fiancé and I moved out. Now she is calling me begging to move back into the house and still sending me bills to pay for her, even though I now have my own bills to pay. I was even courteous enough to pay her bills on top of mine last month, but now I think she thinks this is the norm, and I should support two households, even though my mother is making more than me. But she states she is saving up for her papers and citizenship, therefore her needs are more important than mine, I suppose. So please tell me, AITA? Because I do feel a deep sense of sadness in me, and I can't speak to anyone older than me about this, as my country has a very honor your parents, no matter how abusive they are, mindset, and that renting is dead money, so it's better to endure and save for a house. My aunts even told me to forget and to move on, that my mother stayed with my abuser for years, and let the past be the past, so I know speaking to them about leaving my mother high and dry to deal with her own problems will go on deaf ears, and I will be forced to hear the honor thy mother and thy father line until the day I probably die from my own anxiety. I know that my mother is taking advantage of me, as she is making the funds to pay her own bills, but prefers to save up for her citizenship rather than deal with her own bills and mistakes. And moving back home isn't the answer, because now that I've moved out, I've never been happier in my life, and I realize I've been suffering with depression and anxiety for years due to the environment my mother put me in. OP is not an AH for prioritizing her well-being. OP's mother is an AH for emotionally abusing and manipulating her throughout her life. OP's decision to set boundaries from her toxic mother is 100% justified. So, I would rate OP's mother 2.5 and OP 0 out of 5 on the AH scale. What do the Mac Reddit fans think? Is the OP an AH or not? Let me know in the comment section below. If you like the stories I brought you, just hit the like button, share them as much as you can, and don't forget to subscribe to Mac Reddit for a daily dose. Bye bye. See you tomorrow with some more spicy fries.